Hello, Internet. It's time for another Wednesday's serial. This time I have a gazillion comics to talk about, so I'm just gonna get to it. But before anything else, Cyclops was right! So first up, Venom Dark Origin 505. This came out forever ago, but I just managed to find a copy. And if you haven't read this, it really just kind of stretches out Venom's origin story, and it's kind of interesting to see them try to inject more into what's a really simplistic story. So, I don't know, it was weird. Just thought I'd bring it up because I probably never will again. Okay. So the End Times of Bram and Ben, and this is 3 of 4. They play it up with Bram needing to do these checklists after being saved in order to re-enter heaven, but also help this whole hell on earth deal, and it gets crazy. And what really impressed me about this is this issue, whereas it plays in the larger story, is very much an issue its own, and it plays more to what cliffhangers should be, I think, in a sort of ongoing series, and this has been one of the coolest things Image has put out. At this point, it's only at 3 or 4. It's probably relatively easy to find the issues. I would highly recommend it because it's one of the few things to kind of hit a note of comedy that very few comic books seem to manage to hit, and it's just been fun to read something a little different. You know what I mean? Alright, Rainbow Dash micro series, which interestingly, near as I can tell, is something IDW's been pulling. I've never seen anyone else do a micro series thing except for the Ninja Turtles back in the day to kind of highlight characters and whatnot. Then when IDW brought in Ninja Turtles, they started doing that. And I think they've done something with some of their other properties, but I noticed it with this, and I thought I'd check it out, and it's very much about pushing things to the max and whatnot. It's cool to see some different art and see how they take the flash animation style sort of thing going on that's from the show and then bring it to the page and have something that's just colorful and nice and something you could hand to a bunch of people who wouldn't normally hand a comic, and, you know, something different, which is something I was needing. So if you're looking for something off-base, it actually might be worth checking out for you. I don't know. Now, next up was DC Universe Presents, and I'm glad this is still going. I hope they actually keep DC Universe Presents running, because it seems like something that they get to take a chance on month to month and maybe stand to be a little more creative with. But now they're going through the Red Hood and the Outlaws main cast, and since they've already done Arsenal, now they're on Starfire, which means Red Hood's next, right? And, this one was really interesting because Starfire has been a big contention, one of the biggest things that bugged me initially about the 52, but that I then got over. And it's kind of well exemplified in this comic. And I'd say that because I picked it up just because last month they brought me on board and I was like, okay. And then Starfire, they have this here, and it's that very okay costume. I'm sure some people like it, but it's a bit much, especially for something that's not supposed to be porn. Not really, but it's just, it doesn't work, and it's not really a good costume at any rate. You flip the page, and then you see her presented like this. And all of a sudden I'm like, alright, okay, cool, we have this barbarian thing, and you find out she's been enslaved again, and this comic is just her breaking free of slavery and being so badass, essentially, that she scares everyone off, and she becomes larger than life, and it's this whole deal, and it's kind of a crazy story to be told in one issue anymore, and it really adds something to her character, and it was something really interesting to read. And I think if you're looking for a pro-feminist look on comics, this is a good issue to pick up. I mean, it's not for the kids by any means, but it's a tale all there, and she's just a character, and it's all those beats you're supposed to hit that, and it was just interesting to see, this cover and how they sell her, and then whenever someone has to write a character, what they immediately go through and do to make her such an interesting, vibrant character, and it's like, why not sell the character that's being written? why not sell the substance? And it's interesting to me, and I almost wonder if it's the marketing of comics that's so just like the part you want to push away from versus, when you actually get down and read some of the things, some of that washes away because it's not even the same thing. It's interesting to see that. So that issue just really took that and spun it all around with Starfire, and I highly recommend you pick that issue up because that's all there is of it, and see if you get something a little more out of it, because it was a comic that got me thinking in a bunch of different ways, and on its own right, the idea of slavery and then like how you break free, and the idea of being okay with where you're at because it's routine and all that. It's very well written. Okay, Turtles 21. Now, we get the end of the space excursion arc. You can probably kind of tell what's been going there if you've been following it, and because it's very akin to when this happened, but they're tying all of this. It's kind of crazy if you know the Turtles' history. They're taking the initial space odyssey, them being transported out, and they've twisted that already, and they ended up in this war between one faction, kind of the more humanity side, versus the more alien side. And on this alien side now we have Krang, and then on the human side you have something that was only ever really in the earlier part of the cartoon, which were these kind of like 80s space kids. And they're the human side, and then they have a princess that Michelangelo goes and saves, and you have a little bit of play there with the princess. And it's just interesting to see them twist that, and I'm kind of curious to see, because the Triceratons are there, but not in the same capacity, and I feel like something's lost there, but I've already seen that story told in two different ways, so I don't care. Maybe they'll bring it back for that, because that could be a whole nother story in its own right. And then we see something more interesting, which is that we have Donatello and the Fugitoid being kind of more paired to each other, making them more this similar extrapolation, which is interesting because you've always had Casey Jones, and he's obviously very much an extrapolation of Raphael. And I really liked that. My only concern, and that's looking forward, and I almost feel like they'd have to realize that it's not a good move to make, is if they found a character to extrapolate with every other character, with the four turtles, and that would obviously lose something. So, hopefully not. It hasn't even gone there, so I worry about it, right? And just seeing this twist with the mythos and seeing where it's all leading, interesting. I've heard some interviews and stuff. It sounds like coming up this summer they're making a big Turtles event, which is kind of that leader going rogue sort of thing, which is something that's been played with before, but it sounds like they're going to bring it up a notch, so I'm really interested to see where this series is going. Guys, if you haven't been reading Ninja Turtles, catch up, check it out. I'm obviously a big fan, but I have to say the series has been constantly delivering on a way that nearly no other comic franchise delivers regularly. So it's just been amazing, and I can't wait for what's next. The only thing that cuts it down is I think we're finally completely rid of the Indy Coon art. Maybe he's doing a filler issue in and then out or something. I don't know. But we have Ben Bates back on art, and he's definitely better. Some of the line work is a little looser, especially when you get to a more zoomed out scene. You can't really... But, it's there, it's a bit cartoony, it's not as good as where the series started, and it's sad that they lost that artist, but such is comics, right? But what's interesting, I'm just going to jump into the next one, because it's the end of the Foot Clan mini, which has been awesome. They took the Shredder, this archetype villain and whatnot, and made him more archetypical in some ways, but yet more interesting and complex, and played up the level of the threat, and tied in all kinds of mythos into the Turtles world that is more Ninja Warrior-esque sort of deal. And it just, oh my gosh, it just took everything and took it a level higher. It was great. And the art on here is done in a really interesting way, and I don't think there's a single panel in here, but you can see kind of this art style the guy's using. It's interesting. It's definitely a little different. Takes a little getting used to. And I really like it. One thing that I found very interesting that this artist did is to differentiate the turtles a touch more. He had all of their bandanas cut differently. So, like, Leonardo's comes down to a V. Donatello's is pretty straight with just kind of a little notch in it at the top. Raphael's kind of comes down a little bit to give kind of like a Spawn-esque vibe or something like that, which is a little odd. And then Michelangelo's is cut to be a little bit more rounded out, a little bit more the cartoony look. It's been interesting. One thing that I found very bizarre is they've always played Michelangelo to be kind of more the jokester, all that, obviously, but in this latest comic series, and a little more in this mini, they're playing him to be the younger brother, which is a nice little dynamic. And also, they gave him something, because so far in this series, working with Michelangelo's been a bit more, they gave him this talent where apparently the turtles are embodiment of these old samurai warriors, just in new same spirits and new bodies, essentially, that's caught up in this age-long dilemma that's been going on, which this is how they really raise up this Ninja Turtles thing to a feudal Japan thing, and allows them to maybe go back and play with some of that straight just feudal Japan stuff. And you could have a Turtles mini that has nothing to do with the Turtles, but you see glimpses of their characters, these age-old samurais. I don't know if they're going to go that direction, because that might be something that wouldn't sell well, I could see. But I'd like to see at least one issue of that. Wonder Woman 18, and I feel remiss to talk about this because this wraps up the first 18 issues to some degree. And the only real down point for me, whereas I know some people have been feeling this series has been going downhill, is simply the fact that there's kind of a bow on something that should have been series building as well as arc building. So, but if you haven't been reading Wonder Woman, do not pick it up here. Go back, check it out. This has been one of the best things that DC has been putting out, hands down, and certainly something that they needed to do with the New 52, because Wonder Woman's always been one of those characters that's been kind of nebulous. I'm hoping this is kind of a sleeper hit in some ways, because Wonder Woman's profile really should be picked up, because Lord knows DC needs someone other than Batman and Superman to take some reins, because the stock on those two characters is burning quick. Red Hood and the Outlaws 18, this has been the weakest issue of this series. Too much Bat-related stuff. Oh no, Robin died, which doesn't even really factor into this comic, because it's mostly Jason's fever dream dealing with the whole Joker deal. So I feel like they slapped that onto this comic. If people were buying this simply for Requiem, they'd be disappointed. Yeah, and this is just playing a little too heavily into the Batverse. It does kind of show why there's this oddball group of three running around a bit more, but this one hurt a little, and it was kind of everything that I was afraid this would be. Too much Red Hood with the bat boob thing going on here. Not just further away from that issue that the series gets, the better. More space travel craziness, doing what no other DC comics doing. That's where that comic should be. Doctor Who Prisoners of Time. This is a really bizarre comic to try to parse. Every issue is a different Doctor, and they just kind of go through, and where the links are being linked is starting to show three for a pattern, but nothing really apparent yet. It's kind of hard to read some of these. I'm not really a fan of the classic Who stuff, because never really got a chance to watch it, I guess. I don't know. and it's interesting, but it's also kind of nice because you can just read it for the story. But it's interesting to see how each one of these different doctors is a different character with a similar tact. And I think that's really the appeal of trying to go into this, is getting to like compare and contrast each of supposedly the same character, yet they're not at all. And that whole idea of the Doctor, and that's what drew me to this, and that's why I'm reading this. And they don't really play on that too much, so that's a little disheartening, but it's still fun to go along, and hopefully that will pick up as the series moves along. Another interesting bit for those of you who are a bit more of comic historians and whatnot, there are these essays in the back of each issue where they talk about the older Doctor Who comics and kind of how that was its own separate universe from the rest of everything, and certainly not canon necessarily, but tried to play like it was. And there's some interesting notes on here for, one of the oldest characters, and kind of reading Doctor Who as if he was a comic character, and it's interesting, but at the same time, this is the third essay now, and they're kind of all have the same points. I wish they'd focus a little more on each Doctor individually in that respect again. I think the key there is, and the selling point is taking this famous character that's not really the same character and really exploring that. They're just kind of touching on it as an aspect. So see how it turns out. And I'm in this one for the long haul because I'm just too morbidly curious. But yeah, we'll see. True 32 is crazy and picking up, and this has been the first, I don't know why, this has been the first issue of Chew that really felt to me like there's no apologies anymore. If you haven't been reading Chew, you're not going to get a lot of this. Oh well, go back, check it out. This has been a great series, but there's so much in here that's just stories moving along, and it doesn't have time to apologize for the fact that there's a lot going on. So that's been a great read. Of course, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the fact that Saga 11 came out this week, and many of us enjoyed it, I'm sure. I actually wanted to take this moment because I've been talking with a friend, and he's done with Saga. He hasn't enjoyed the last chunk, and I just wanted to explore that for a bit, just because it's very much a minority opinion, at least within my circles. His view is mostly that the pacing has just died ever since they relaunched. The first issue back was too focused on family form, and that was enough, and he was really more into the sci-fi concepts of it all. And then this issue said moved too fast, he read it too quickly for it to be justified, and it didn't really go anywhere. Interesting to hear. I disagree. I think it's pacing, and sometimes you have to vary up the pacing and all that, and then there's flashbacks and of course all that, and it's moving the characters, and there's kind of a concept. It's not always a crazy sci-fi concept in every issue. There's usually at least a concept played with. So, I don't know. Just thought I'd put that out there just for you to maybe look at some stuff you're reading and maybe view it a little differently. Batwoman 18 comes around, and we're on a different art staff. We're away from Amy Reeders, so I like the art in this. It's obviously not J.H. Williams art, but I feel like this issue worked. It was a little easier to get into, and maybe not as satisfying, but it certainly was good. And it moved, and they do explore a little bit in here again Batwoman's relationship with the DEO, how that's factoring with Batman and Gotham, and that's all well and good. I have to admit that hit me a little weird this week because there's so much bull going on with Batman right now, coming off the Joker, coming off of Robin being killed, and just seeing Batman being Batman here was just kind of like, okay, whatever. Hey, look, it's Batman again. And frankly, his face just showing up made me sad. But that's not this comic's fault. It was there for a point in the book, and it could not really have been any other character. Though I would argue maybe playing a little more of the Nightwing to Batwoman character bit could be interesting because they actually do have a relationship, though she may or may not realize it. I think that could be something that'd be a little fun to play too. Plus, Batwoman and Nightwing could be a little more interesting just because it's not Batman. But hey, there's a Batman I like, and this, the Batman portion of this is very much a fallout from the whole big story arc that was going on, and it's one of the best Fallout sort of issues I've seen play that changes the status quo and does something that you always wanted to see in the cartoon that never really happened. They pushed it so close in this comic, and they're like, no, you know what, we're going for it. And if you read it, you'll totally know what I mean. It was just kind of refreshing, if maybe a little, but it worked, and it was interesting. And then they also play in a female Flash at the end for the future Justice League, and play with the idea of the Flash mythos a little in there. And it was a fun, quick little beat up, which was nice after the kind of dregs that this comic started you in. Again, this is very much an anthology book, but it's all with a theme and a point, and it's fun month to month, guys. This is better than pretty much every other Bat book consistently, except for like Batwoman and Batman, because I don't read the rest, so I don't like them. Ha! Daredevil's moving forward, and I think there was a few things explored in this issue that were interesting that I was kind of curious about. We're seeing Foggy with cancer, and they play on that, and that is becoming an interesting point, and I actually like the writing of it, though it's a little much. You have his play, and the superheroics are very much like the last thing going on, but it's interesting to me him playing with Hank Pym, not playing with, but I mean Hank Pym being kind of the Avenger contact in this book, and using him is so great because he's not an overused character, and it makes sense that Daredevil needs kind of a science contact, and so it works out. I'm so glad it's not Spider-Man right now. And we also get to see some just general play of the issue. But one thing that this made me think of was Daredevil, most of the time in this, is Matt Murdock, and Matt Murdock is dressed in normal clothes. Hank Pym is seen a chunk of the while in this, but he's always in his giant man outfit. Even when he's doing super science, he's in his outfit. It hit me as this bizarre contrast, because it was something I didn't really realize, but I started reading a couple other comics and kind of hyper noticing this. This is actually brought up in Uncanny X-Men 3. Most of the time these characters are just in their costumes for no real reason, just because they're in their costume, as opposed to just being dressed normally. And there's a play with that in the X-Men comic, and it was just kind of oddly dealt with in this issue, and I wonder if that's sometimes written in, or if it's the art duty. I'm sure it's issue to issue, beyond writer to writer dependent, and, interesting. Deadpool ended, and I wondered if one thing was vaguely sexist, a la women in refrigerators, but I will not be able to parse that until I read another issue. But it's interesting, and it was funny, and actually took the entire 5 issues prior to it and gave them more meaning. This isn't the best Deadpool comic ever, because it was never going to be, but it's good, and it's doing something a little different, thank God. Then, just because I think this is the last time it's ever going to get a shop, my pick of the week is Mystery Society Special. It was interesting to see this without Fiona Staples, and the art still worked and went in a completely different direction. But you get to see some literary classic stuff in here, and I feel like Niles had a couple moments he just really wanted to put in, and this came out, but this was a fun thing all by its own.